Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is also, I'm the head of education at Art and Culture Development Foundation. As most of you know, today we're going to have another online session with the representatives of the British Museum, the manager of the Wolfson Programme, Holly Wilson, as well as the manager of Equality and Diversity, Fiona Slater. They're going to talk about the opportunities for people with autism within the cultural spaces. So now I shall yield the floor to Fiona.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Holly. I'm the Wolfson Project Programme Manager at the British Museum, which I'll go on to talk a little bit later about. We've been invited here to talk to you about the work we've been doing over the last couple of years around making opportunities for autistic visitors at the British Museum. I'm just going to quickly hand over to Fiona to introduce herself.
Hello, hi, I'm Fiona Slater and I'm the Equality and Diversity Manager at the British Museum. I have a sort of role in programming work and sort of the strategic direction for equality and diversity at the museum. So I think Holly's going to give us a bit of an overview about the session, then we're going to give you some of the kind of wider view of equality at the British Museum, and then we're going to focus in specifically at the Wolfson project, which I think you're all keen to hear about. So is there any question, Holly?
Yeah, so like I said, I'll give you a bit of an overview about Wolfson, when it started in the museum and how the focus has changed, and then I'll predominantly be focusing on our early morning events that we set up last year, which is provision for families with sensory processing requirements, including autism, how we set it up, the approach we've taken and how we've worked with those families, and sort of the key learnings that we've taken from it that you might want to take away with you. So I'm just going to hand over to Fiona, who's going to give you a bit of a wider context to the British Museum and the work we've been doing.
Yes, so the Wolfson project is a programme which sits within a kind of wider scope of work. This is other activity and events that we might run for audiences across the museum. And I wanted to focus a little bit about why it's important to us, and also some of the kind of the framework and the legal context of why we do this work as well in the UK. So we talk about being a museum of the world for the world. So it's really important with a kind of tagline or slogan like that, that we make sure that the museum, the building, the facilities and the resources and the programming that we do is accessible to the widest number of people across the world. So that's kind of what we're striving for. It's one of our core values. So we have at the British Museum the core values of stewardship, openness, insight, diversity and excellence. And when we talk about diversity as that core value, we're talking about the fact that we value and respect different voices and opinions, and how having different voices and opinions strengthens the organisation. So it makes the British Museum a stronger, more resilient organisation. So that's one of our core values, and it's gives you the context for where this programme sits within the museum. So we also work to something called the social model of disability, and that's something that is really useful as a kind of methodology or a model to look at when we're looking at our work. So the social model of disability was developed in the 80s and 90s in the UK. It was developed by disabled people, and it states that disability is not connected to an individual's condition or medical condition or an impairment, but it's connected to societal barriers. So disability is barriers within society. And an example of this might be that a wheelchair user is not disabled because they use a wheelchair, they're disabled because there's no ramp or step-free access into a building. And we use the social model of disability to identify who's responsible for making changes. And as an institution, as a public institution, we see that it's our responsibility to remove barriers for people to access our collection and our building. So that's a social model of disability, and it's been really useful in kind of helping, communicate to people why we need to make changes. And if we go on to the next slide, just to quickly highlight that in the UK, we also work to, legally, we have to meet the 2010 Equalities Act. And the 2010 Equalities Act makes it illegal to discriminate against people based on protected characteristics. And there's 9 protected characteristics. So people might identify with one or more of these, and they're up on the screen, but I'll read them as well. It's age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy or maternity, sexual orientation, race, religion or belief, and sex. And so it's a good case to say that it's actually illegal if we don't make adjustments to the building and the organisation if we're seen to be discriminating against people. So we talk about making adjustments. We also need to plan in advance and on an ongoing basis, which basically means that we need to think about who might be trying to access the museum, what audiences do we want to encourage to come to the museum but might be facing barriers to coming in and accessing parts of our programme or collection. So we need to think about that, and we need to kind of consider, in terms of the wider equality and diversity, all these different audiences who might identify in different ways, and think about how the programming and how our sort of resources can remove barriers for people. So that's the kind of wider context of where this programme sits, and we can go, I won't go into specifics about other parts of the programme because we haven't got enough time, but we're going to focus in now on the Wolfson project, and Holly's going to give you a kind of real deep dive into how she's been setting up that.
Yeah, so just to give a bit of context, so the Wolfson project is an education access programme that's been running in the museum since 2004. It's sponsored by the Lord Leonard and Lady Estelle Wolfson Foundation, and it's fundamentally trying to make the museum more accessible and inclusive for people with learning disabilities and other neurodiverse profiles such as autism. This can cover tailored events, creating resources to support independent visits, and general advice and guidance. There are 2 main work streams to the programme: Explore More, which is focused around young people and adults, and the second work stream, Museum and Me, which is families and children. And this is the stream that I'm going to talk to most today, as this is where the early morning Explorers events sit within. Obviously, a lot of this work, just to flag, was pre-COVID and pre-lockdown, and so this has actually postponed things a little bit for this year, but it's obviously still talking about work that we did prior and work that we're still continuing now that we're back open. So as a starting point, we looked at the current experience for families within the museum, and it's crucial, I think, to think about how you actually engage this network. So you're setting up something, you're trying to make the museum more inclusive and accessible for a specific target audience, and therefore you need to speak to that target audience to get the insight and feedback of people with lived experience, and to make sure they're really involved in all stages of the process. So the starting point was we sent out a survey. We created the survey using Google Forms, and then we promoted it through social media, through local organisations. So for us, we have the National Autistic Society, and we have local branches. So we asked them to promote it through their social media and their networks. And another key area for me was actually going to other pre-existing events that other museums were running for this target audience, and actually starting to meet people, to speak to families, and quite a lot of them were keen to be involved and actually said that yes, they wanted to be involved and gave me their contact details. So this target audience has a strong social network presence, they have social media, they have existing support groups, and it's really key for you to be able to sort of be a part of that and to have people that will promote it for you. So we had 122 responses. This is actually a Wordle created, so it's pulling out the most frequently mentioned words that we used that came up when we asked people, what has been your previous experience of the British Museum? And as you can see, we had words such as crowded, busy, noisy, crowds, leave, difficult, stressful, chaotic, And so you can see it's not been, or for some families, it hadn't been the most positive experience, and it had been very challenging. This target audience really went into detail about the challenges they face. So this covered, as you can see, crowds, just the sheer quantity of people that are in the museum, the noise levels can be too much as a result, wayfinding. So actually once they're in the museum, it can be very difficult to find their way around. There's obviously lots of people, it's a big museum, there can be unexpected events or occurrences or changes that people aren't expecting, and this can cause quite a lot of anxiety and stress. They say they find quite time-bound and rigid activities can be quite difficult, so having, you know, a really strict structure they have to follow can be quite overwhelming. And all of these things can make it very stressful, make someone very anxious, but also can lead to sensory overload, so can actually lead to shutdowns, meltdowns, and generally a negative experience for the family. So it was really crucial that we gained all that feedback, that we really understood the challenges people were facing, before we could then get feedback and insight and input in how we could take it forward. I just want to flag here as well, it's really crucial that you think about the whole museum journey. So not just the point when the visitor comes into the door, but actually from the moment they decide that they're going to attend the museum to the point when they've gone home and they're reflecting on their visit a couple of days later. For many people, they'll have had a negative experience getting into the museum on their journey. They might have had previous experiences in the week that have been stressful, and even things like queuing for a bag check can be quite overwhelming. And so in order to give someone a really positive experience around the museum, you really do need to think about that whole journey and not just that bit once they're inside. I'm going to talk through a tool a little bit later on that's really useful that you might find helpful when thinking about creating these kind of events. So this was the first stage, was a survey. The second stage was then we set up an advisory panel. So again, through using our contacts, through using local organisations, and through the mailing list we created from the survey, we were able to set up an advisory panel of 14 people. This was a mixture of both children and parents. Both the parents and the children in some cases had autism, and it was really about trying to gain more in-depth feedback and trial some of the activities with people with lived experience. So this was run on the museum. It was run during the school holidays down in our education centre, and it was thinking about how we could trial different activities and get resources in a way that wasn't stressful for the person, but did still manage for them to be on site. So again, thinking about how we could make adaptations, how we could send out pre-visit information. The format of the session was a focus group. So we split into two halves. The first half, we split into children and parents. So the parents were focused more around overall museum experience, the sort of logistical side, what it's like to actually plan a visit and to come in the visit. And the other side was working with the children and actually trialing some different activities that we created based on the survey. So this could include like sensory boxes, arts and crafts. So it's to get both the children's and adults information and feedback, but obviously in different ways, and then bringing it together in the final part of the session, which was then doing a combined sensory storytelling session so that we could get the adults' input into activities too. It was really useful for us to trial activities that we might run at an early morning event, gain that feedback, but also to highlight key opportunities across the whole museum. So some of these I've pulled out. So having things like quiet spaces, having the ability to fast track through so that you're not having to wait, having trained staff support. So really crucial that you have staff that are aware, that are non-judgmental and can help if needed. And having different resources, so things like sensory maps, which I'm going to come on to later on. So that was our second stage. We sort of done the initial wider context, a bigger group, getting lots of little bits of feedback. This was really allowing us to drill down, get more detailed feedback one-on-one, and specifics on specific activities and events. And then this combined with working with Claire Madge, who's an external consultant that runs the Autism in Museums account in the UK and has done lots of work across the heritage sector to give some additional input, we were then able to pull together our first early morning explorers format. So The Early Morning Explorers is run on Sunday mornings between 8 and 10 a.m. So it's outside of our existing hours, meaning that we can open it just for this target audience. We don't have to worry about lots of crowds, members of the public. We can control who comes in and out, and we can control the museum environment. Sunday mornings was chosen because families fed back that Sunday mornings in London is a quieter time to travel. So again, it's thinking about that wider museum journey. And actually, this means that they're probably going to have the best journey in and be in the most kind of positive state when they first arrive at the museum. We then thought about different sensory-based drop-in activities. So again, having that kind of drop-in feel to the day. You don't have to arrive at 8, you don't have to leave by 10. You can come for as little or as long as you like, whenever you might manage to get there, because obviously for some families, having a specific time they're aiming for is just not possible. And again, having a wide variety of activities where you don't feel like you have to do everything. You can just drop in at any time. If there's one particular thing that you're only interested in, you can come and spend the entire time just on that one activity. Thinking about having sensory and quiet spaces, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. As I've mentioned before, having trained staff. So at the British Museum, we have the National Autistic Society come in and do autism awareness training with staff across the museum. But it's really crucial for me that when we have the facilitators that are working at this event, that they've taken that training, so they know what to expect and they know how to handle certain situations and what to look out for. It's also crucial here that I just mentioned, you've got to think about the wider staff that are involved in the day. So obviously you've got to get lots of museum staff on board from different departments. And I would really suggest doing a briefing in the morning. So we always do a briefing at the start of the event with all the staff that are working the event, just so that everybody knows what the event's for, the sort of tone of the event, what to expect, and to just give some tips on what to do if there are things like meltdowns and shutdowns, so that everybody knows how to react in that situation. As I've said, because we can control it, we can do it quiet and less crowded. And the aim for us is to do 3 a year, each with a different theme. And as part of that wider context of the wider journey, making sure we send out pre-visit materials each time. So this first part really to the museum, to our journey for the early morning events, is we set it up online, we promote it through social media, through our website, through our networks. People can book free tickets online through our website. And then we have the visual story or the pre-visit information. So I've just pulled out a couple of pages, but I always send out a week before a visual story in a PDF format, which allows the family to plan, to know what to expect and manage anxiety. So this will talk through where they're going, the museum. We have things like the clock symbol you can see, so it's giving that visual view of what time they're going to be arriving. It goes into detail about the rooms they'll visit, which galleries are open, the theme of the event, activities they can take part in, and even going down to having levels of pictures of staff so they know what sort of uniforms to look out for. We always wear purple t-shirts, so they know that the facilitators and the people they can ask for help are in purple. They know visitor services will have a red lanyard. So just really helping them to understand who they're going to be meeting, and so they can really plan ahead. It's also useful in this kind of document if you have any facilities that are available, so accessible toilets, places they can eat, a cafe, if you have lockers that the families can use, putting all this information in there. So again, it just really helps them to know what's available, what to expect, and if they need to talk through in depth with the child. We also send out an event timetable, which goes into detail about the different galleries that are going to be open, because we don't open up the entire museum just because it's so big. So we open up just specific galleries. So it'll talk through what galleries are open, what activities are available, and they'll all be color coded. So again, it's thinking about different audiences, what they might need. And so, for instance, color can be a really key an easy way to show people different areas and to get them to understand the different activities that are available. And we'll also send out a sensory map, which looks at quieter areas, busier areas, different light levels. And I'm going to show you an example of this later. So this is all sent out a week before in PDF format. And it's really about trying to get the planning and helping them to manage expectations with the family. One thing I also wanted to point out with this part is feedback that we had from families was to not identify the activities or the event as being for children with additional needs. Because actually that can alienate some parents who it could be the parent that's autistic or has a sensory processing requirement. And so it's their requirement that means that they can't come during the day when it's busy. But if you're just saying this is an event for children, it means that they feel they can't come. So using language like sensory processing requirements, not just autism, and using language about being the family with a requirement, not just the child, means it is more open and accessible to a wider audience that will benefit from coming in a quieter setting. So language is really key, and I do think you should, go out to your audience and see what language they want and what they'll respond to best. So then we have the feedback. So just wanted to share a little bit that we had, it was very helpful to plan ahead and manage expectations and anxiety. We love them. They're autism friendly, simple, clear. This particular child really enjoys transport. So he loved the Get Into the British Museum guide that I'd sent out, which had walking routes and the nearest trains and stuff like that. And so even though it wasn't specific to the theme of the event, it still was a way that he was engaging with the museum, something that he really enjoyed. So we have the pre-visit materials, and then on the day the family arrive, we have somebody waiting at the gate, and I really try and get you to think about all the different stages and how you can move people through as quickly as possible with limited waiting time, make it as easy for them as a family as you can. So we have someone to meet them at the gate that ticks them off. They can then go straight through without having to go through security to the welcome desk, where they can pick up the event resources, so the timetable, the sensory map. And we also give out instructions here as to where things like the toilets are, so useful information, where they can put their bags. If there's any information we want to give specifically about particular activities, then we can flag it here. And one good tip that I just share with you is if you want to take photos of your event, having some kind of sticker. So we always choose a sticker for the event that has one of our objects related to the theme on it. And you can use different coloured backgrounds. So blue might mean, yes, I can be in a picture, and pink might mean, no, I don't want to be in a photograph. That's just a quick way that you can identify whether or not they want to be in a picture without having to go up to them through the event, which again could be a triggering event for some people. So again, it's just trying to think about all those things that you can do during the event to sort of make it as easy as them for the family as possible. As I've said, the activities we choose are mainly sensory based, they're drop-in, and we try to use a wide variety. So it's important to remember there's lots of different interests and abilities and requirements that people have. And therefore you need to have a wide variety of activities that people can choose to do. So we have a mixture of arts and crafts, we have sort of puzzle and logic challenges, we can have object handling, sensory storytelling, music and dance, but we try to make sure there is a variety so that if people do have specific interests, they can just go to that specific activity. This is a photograph from our first event on the 29th of September last year, and this was around ancient Greece, and this was object handling. So it used a mixture of sensory opportunities, so we had touch, we had smell, there was replicas as well as real objects, so we had an ancient Greek coin that the children could look at and touch, and we had a facilitator there with laminates who could go into more detail. So this was about how we can use different tactile opportunities to engage that audience member and to help them with their informal learning. The second activity I just wanted to share with you was from our second event, which was around creatures, and this was in the Enlightenment Gallery. And this was a walking sensory storytelling session. So we had an external storyteller called Olivia Armstrong come in, and she picked out 3 objects within the collection. So it was a mermaid, a dragon, and a griffin. And she told individual little stories about each object, and we gave the children magnifying glasses so they could go around and look, so it had that sensory element. There was cushions, there were seats, or they could stand. So again, it's making it an activity they can tailor to what they want to do. And then we use things like sequin materials for the scales of the mermaid, having songs about the sea. And obviously, I just want to flag here that obviously with everything that's gone on recently, these sorts of activities would need to be adapted going forwards, and you might need to think about how you could do these things differently. So it could be individual activity bags, not sharing objects that you're all touching and things like that. but these do work really well. And we actually even adapted one of the storytelling sessions to an online storytelling session. So Olivia recorded it at home, and then she did a list of props that people could find at home, like pasta or rice to make the sounds of the sea. And so families could actually do a storytelling session at home that related to objects that they had come and seen at the prior ancient Greeks event. So you've just got to think about how you can adapt it, but these activities do work really well. So that was kind of the activities. And then another key factor of the events was having pop-up quiet spaces. So one of the things that families had really flagged to us was that actually having quiet spaces or sensory spaces were really crucial when they were coming to the museum. Even though we're a very big museum, the British Museum doesn't actually have that much free space. So trying to find a room that we can use, one, just a room in general that's free that we can use is quite a hard task. But two, actually finding a room that is in a good location from most places within the museum to get to easily is quite difficult. So one solution we've come up with is to have these pop-up sensory spaces, and they've gone down really well with the target audience. So we just use pop-up tents or teepees. We tend to use the colour white because we can project light onto them. And we've spent, I think, a few £100s on then getting some sensory equipment. So like cushions, blankets, lights, different sensory toys that vibrate, make sounds. And as you can see, we can pop them up anywhere. So this was popped up in our Nereid gallery in front of the Nereid monument. And the activity in the gallery was relating to arts and crafts and the sort of sea nymphs of the ancient Greek world. And so what we did is we had a light that projected like wave-like, you know, the light going through the waves. We had books in there related to ancient Greece that were sensory and tactile. And so there is a quiet sensory space the child can use, but they can still be part of the activity. They can still be in that space without necessarily being right in the middle where there's all the children doing their activity. And as you can see, again, the feedback we've had, we love the sensory quiet areas with pop-up tents. They're a real help. Thank you to the British Museum for making it more accessible and fully inclusive. And the good thing about these is obviously they can be adapted, they can be changed, they can be moved around quite easily. They're cost effective, and also they can be used by lots of other departments. So for us now, they've been used by our membership teams with the Young Friends sleepovers, and they've also been used at our British Museum 2019 National Partnerships Programme Conference, where you can see the picture. This tweet was talking about how these are her top picks for making every conference inclusive. So it's really good that something that we've used for one specific activity and for one target audience has actually made the museum more accessible just generally. So again, it's just sort of highlighting that you can make quite small changes that can have quite a big impact on making an event or an event accessible. So now I'm just going to quickly go through some of the feedback. So I'll talk in a little bit in a minute about the sort of evaluation side, but this was just some of the feedback we received through Twitter and through emails. So, you know, the first tweet we received, it was their first British Museum morning session. It's somewhere they'd always wanted to come with their daughter, but due to crowds, it wasn't possible until today. Another tweet said it was the first time they'd really been able to understand and engage with the objects, because obviously they were able to get a lot closer and spend more time with it. And one particular email, which I've highlighted there, spoke about the fact that we've had a customer for life. He hasn't stopped raving about it since he left. So it makes a really big impact for the families. 50% of the event attendees from our first event on the 29th of September were visiting for the first time. 100% said they would come back and revisit and they would recommend it to their friends. And sort of the crucial feedback for families was that it was allowing them to engage more with the galleries and learn new things. It was allowing them to just be in the space and enjoying it without the crowd. So as well as having the activities, it's just nice for them to be in the museum space and be able to enjoy it and really take it all in without the crowds there. And obviously there is a social aspect for both the children and the parents. So it's a chance for them to come together, somewhere they can come where it's a non-judgmental environment, it's quiet, and they can actually have a good time as a family. So that was kind of the sort of more informal feedback. We then did evaluation. So we felt it was important to get information on the day, to collect sort of live information and evaluation. And so this was inclusive, or trying to be inclusive. So we've based on the ancient Greek theme, we had urns. So the first question you can see here was, would you visit the British Museum again? And they just had to put a sticker, yes or no. Which was your favourite activity? So the children, as they were leaving, I think you can see it in the next picture. Fiona's not going to like this one. She's in the background. But yeah, so you can see the children, as they were leaving, just had to put a sticker where they wanted, what their favourite activity was, or whether they would come back. And you can also see in the very far corner, we had just, could you give one word to describe your experience of the day? So it's quite a nice, quick way for us to just gather some initial feedback live on the day and from the children directly. The second way was then through a survey, which we sent out after the event. So similar to Google Forms, we sent it out to those that had signed up online. So we had their email, and we again asked them about their experience, what they'd enjoyed, what was their favourite activity, etc. So this was a Wordle we created with the keywords that appeared in their responsive. So you can see it's a lot different to the first one: quiet, lovely, interactive, family time, yeah, sensory. I think there was one that was interactive, inclusive. So there's lots of different, you know, better words, more positive experience for the families that are coming. The key one I think I want to flag here really is, obviously it's great to get the positive feedback, but it was also crucial for us to find out what we could improve. You know, we don't expect the first event to have everything completely right. And actually, I don't think you can ever say it's fully perfect, because you want to keep continuously improving. You want to keep making it more inclusive and keep changing it and making it better each time. So from this, we then went on to look in much more detail. I can send this around as a PDF actually after, because it's obviously quite small to see here. But this is what I was talking about with the visitor journey. So this is actually starting from here on the left, which is previous experience, all the way to sort of being at home and reflecting on the experience that you had. And in between, we have all the different points. So we have the sort of finding out about the event, deciding to come, booking, planning your visit, traveling to the museum. Then we have sort of the event in terms of the registration, the activities, the logistical side of it, so the staff and the space, the end of the event and how that was managed, and then traveling home from the museum. So we did it as by interviewing specific different families. We purposely chose some families that had been at the museum before and some that it was their first time. So we know that we were getting that kind of split and that different experience. And we went through and we spoke to them about the different activities, the different touch points, what interactions had taken place, their emotional experience, so whether it had been negative or positive, and different points and a few quotes. And then really the key thing to take away from it was the insights and opportunities. So what had worked well, what was something we could really learn as a good thing, and what things could we do differently for next time. And so this again helped us to kind of think of how we could adapt the event for the second one, creatures. So it might be things like having more people on registration, having more signage, you know, I'd really pick out the end of the event, so making sure that the end of the event is just as smooth as the going in, so giving them plenty of warning that the museum's going to be opening, that's going to be becoming crowded, thinking about how you can make all the transitions as smooth as possible. So you can see we then did the feedback after our second event, the exact same process, the exact same approach with 6 families again, and we were able to compare. So we were able to see the purple line was the original, the orange line was the original, and then the purple line is our new event. So you can see where we've made improvements, where we've learned, and we were able to really sort of refine, and sort of a couple of the families said to us they could really see that we'd taken on board their previous feedback, and they could really see the change with the second one. So each time we'll keep doing this to make sure we have that kind of continuous improvement, and we're really making sure that we're making it as inclusive and reflective of the families as possible and what they want. So yeah, so that was mainly the early morning Explorers event, how we've set it up. I think we're going to do some Q&A in a minute, so we can give more. But I just really wanted to reiterate, it's about thinking about that whole process, not just the event. And the more you can do to sort of streamline and make everything easier, the better for the families. So I just wanted to touch upon some of the things that we did to sort of support the early morning events, because obviously it is one quite small part of the wider project of the Wolfson project. So one of the things we did was the sensory map. So you can see here it's using colour and images and logos, so to represent things like noisy spaces, quieter spaces, crowdy spaces, spaces where there are strong smells, light levels, so the blue's dimmer light, the yellow is natural light, to just help people if they've got that kind of sensory sensitivity, that they know what they can sort of go towards and what they might want to avoid. And again, it's just about helping about planning, managing expectations, and doing everything you can to make the person have as positive experience as possible. And the feedback has been really positive for this. So having the visuals and sensory maps very helpful. It had all the essential information, so very pleased and well organised. And this one said, I loved it and wish there was a map like this for travelling around London. So it really does make a big impact on, you know, again, quite a small thing that you can do in the museum. It doesn't take a huge amount of time and a huge amount of resource, but it can have a really big impact on somebody's visit. So we do also have the adult side. So this is just a picture I just wanted to quickly share from our Purple Light Up Day. So we do other events in the museum. So this was a full day of disability-led performances, tours and workshops. Just to give you some context, that sort of the Early Morning Explorers was part of a much bigger programme. So this was City Lit, have an orchestra, and it's a disabled orchestra led by their teacher, and they came and performed in our Great Court to launch our Purple Light Up Day. And we also have volunteer placements for 18 to 24-year-old young people who are autistic. And these are two of our volunteers, Toby and Avishai, who came and worked in our Coins and Medals department. So it's about trying to help people transition into the arts and heritage sector and how it relates to sort of their studies and their interests. They're supported, we sort of train the curator, they're supported by myself and the volunteer coordinator, Jess. It's about trying to make, again, the museum accessible, not just from a visit point of view, but also from the kind of entrance into the heritage sector and a working point of view for different people. So I just wanted to add those in as just sort of a bit of a context that the Wolfson is part of a bigger project. The Early Morning Explorers is part of Wolfson, which is a bigger project. And even though we focus mainly on Early Morning Explorers, there is lots of other things that you can be doing. So I'm aware that's probably quite a lot to take in. But yeah, thank you. And I think we can go over some questions.
Thank you, Holly, so much. Thank you, Fiona, for your contribution. Very interesting presentation. I personally didn't know so many details about it, because from the internet point of view, everything looks very different. Yeah, so right now, if you're not against, can we have a Q&A session? Because there were some followers leaving the questions for the session. Since they do not speak English, they just left the questions, and we will just translate this session afterwards into Russian and Uzbek languages so they can understand.
Oh, yeah.
So the first question was, how was the exposition changed to implement this project?
So when we set up the early morning events, obviously we are closed to the rest of the public. We only pick specific galleries. So we already sort of are thinking about how we can adapt the environment and make it more suitable. So I think it's more about thinking about what galleries we have open and whether they are right for our target audience and the theme. And then look at making sure there's a clear route to follow. So, you know, that, like I said, wayfinding can be an issue. So looking at one clear route, having the pop-up sensory spaces put in the galleries, which can make them more inviting and have that kind of different element. Putting up additional temporary signage. So again, having things like toilets, arrows to show which way. You might have some colour coding to do with the activities. And then there's other things we do, such as if we know a particular gallery has alarms in it, we might switch off the alarms, because obviously we don't want that to sort of trigger any anxiety or meltdowns. We might turn off the hand dryers in nearby toilets or toilets in that area. So again, we don't have lots of loud sounds. And I think one thing to just think about as well is, like I was sort of thinking about saying before about the wider museum context, you have to think about having things like, you know, working with the cleaning team and the facilities management to have the porters and the cleaners going in at different times to usual, because it's things you might not necessarily think of, but obviously if you're in the middle of running an event and you have somebody come through with a big trolley that's making lots of noise, again, that can be quite overwhelming. So it's not necessarily about a specific exhibition, but it's just thinking about the environment of the museum and the specific event space that you're working towards.
I see, very interesting. So the next question was, were such initiatives, such projects held during pandemic after the weakening of quarantine measures?
So not for this project specifically at the moment. Obviously, there's lots of planning that has to go in, but there have been early openings and private views within the museum, including, I think there's one tomorrow for an early opening of one of the exhibitions for families. And it is something that we are looking at trying to get up and running as soon as possible. But obviously, there's lots of different processes and stages we're having to go through now to make sure the museum stays safe. So it's something we are hoping to do, and it is happening for, like I said, for different parts of the museum and for different departments. It's just not been specifically for this project yet.
Okay. Are there any people without autism visiting this program? I mean, for example, siblings of children with autism.
Yeah, so like I said, we sort of open it out to entire families. So that does mean that siblings attend, and I think it is really nice to give an opportunity for the family to come together, because actually, you know, by making the museum accessible for one particular target audience, one, it makes the museum more accessible for everybody, but it does make it more accessible for that entire family. And so I know, not necessarily through research with British Museum, but research that I've looked into in the past and in various other roles has shown that siblings can often or do sometimes miss out if they have a family member with a different requirement, a specific requirement, because the family do find it too difficult to go generally. And so actually it's really nice to give an opportunity for families to come together and give them that time to bond together and meet other families and have that social interaction. And like I said, we don't specify on the website that it's autism only. We just make it clear that it's for anybody that would enjoy coming to the museum at a quieter time, whether that be anxiety, ADHD, you know, various reasons. And so I think it is really crucial to try and sort of make it as open to as many people as possible. And so we know that we do have different people, but it's not something we necessarily sort of keep a definite check on, like, do you have autism, yes or no? We just say, come along. If you feel like it's useful for you, then we want you to come.
Yeah, true. The next question, how did the local communities react to the launch of this project? The local communities of parents with children with autism.
Yeah, like I said, it's been really positive. It's been extremely positive. People have been really supportive. Like I said, when I've gone to events at other museums and spoken to people as to like why I'm there, and we were setting up something similar at the British Museum, people were straight away like, yeah, I want to be involved, giving me their emails. They're really happy to share it with their networks. You know, they're really keen to give their time and do those interviews, you know, and if we've ever had any feedback, really, it's just been more, we want more of it, ways that we can make it even better and to widen the project, obviously. So to look at, make sure that there is provision for young people, for adults, which is something we're hoping to come on to next. But yeah, it's been really positive. We've not had any negative feedback. It's just been, like I said, more about doing more of it.
Well, hopefully after such lectures, after such presentation like yours, some of the museum staff will be interested and inspired to do the same. Because in our country, unfortunately, we don't have something like this for children with autism. And I know that among our listeners today, there are some parents of children with autism who actually hope that something like this will happen in our country very time soon.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think there's been a real focus on it in the UK heritage sector. It's been something that's been, you know, in the last 5 years really has really come to the forefront of attention. And I think most heritage sites within the UK now have some kind of provision for autistic children or adults. So I think it's just one of those things, like once a few people start doing it and seeing how it works in your country, then a few others will start doing it and it snowballs. And that's one thing that's been really great for me, is not just the network of the families, but also the network of the professionals working within the heritage sector. You know, we all catch up, we all speak to each other about what we've been doing, what works well. Everyone's really keen to share resources and learnings, and so it just takes that initial couple of people to start it, and it really does tend to snowball.
Yeah. Then the next question is, how did this program impact on lives of children with autism and the museum's atmosphere overall?
Yeah, so like I said, 50% of the families that were visiting our events were visiting for the first time. So it's really great that it's allowing people to access the museum who weren't able to access it before. We have some families that might be doing homeschooling as well, so it's a way for them to sort of engage in new ways with their schoolwork and their kind of learning. As I've said before, it's a social element for both the children and their parents, which I think was a real crucial thing that came out from the feedback and the evaluation, and that kind of non-judgmental environment that comes from it. So it allows families to spend time together, and try new activities in a supportive environment. But it's also allowed me, and this project and this work has, raised awareness across the museum internally as well with our staff. It's got people thinking about how they can make their events accessible, like I said, with the conference having the pop-up spaces, and people are actively coming and they're interested and they want to find out more and how they can do some of the things within their own work within the museum. So I'm really hoping, and I know it is sort of through this programme, one, directly impacting the children that come to the events and their families, but two, I think it's creating a wider environment where people are more aware, more accessible, inclusive, and it feeds into, as Fiona was saying, the wider equality and diversity work. So it's something that people are focusing on and wanting to be more engaged with, involved with across the museum, making it accessible for all.
And I think we did a similar, because we have staff breakfasts at the British Museum. So that's an opportunity for staff to all come together and hear about different projects that are running at the museum. Because it's such a big organisation, often people don't know, what's going on in different departments. So we did, Holly gave a similar presentation to tell people about the project. And it's really important, I think, that internal communication, because then you get, you have to work with lots of different colleagues, don't you? So Holly will have to go to a curator of a gallery and say, we want to use your space for this event. And it's really important to have their support and for them to be kind of enthusiastic about it. And we also have the autism awareness training, which is for all staff. As Holly said, particularly for people working on this programme, we'll make sure that they, attend that, but actually anyone can sign up to have autism awareness training at the museum. And it's something we kind of, encourage people to do. So that, like I said, we follow up with it and make sure that people that are working directly on it, that it's really open for everyone. So that's something that's ongoing at the museum.
You mentioned that you have autism awareness training. It is conducted by the British Museum staff, or you just invite special organizations to do it?
So we have the National Autistic Society in the UK, and so it's the National Autistic Society that come in and run the training. And it's a training session that has sort of a trainer that comes in, and it's both sort of some classroom-based learning and some going out and going into the museum and actually doing different activities to really get the sort of ideas across. And then it actually has somebody with lived experience as well come in. So it's co-delivered by a national autistic trainer, but also somebody with lived experience. And, all the feedback has been really positive from staff. They find it really useful. They learn a lot, and they often then tend to have more questions when they come away, and they want to find more out about the Wolfson project and the work that Fiona and I have been doing just generally across the museum as a result of it. So it's been really positive. I think it's been in the museum for about 2 years now. And, it's getting more and more popular each time.
That some of the children with autism become the volunteers of the British Museum.
Yeah.
Do you think that it is possible to employ them in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, the reason we're doing it is we're trying to make sure that there is kind of a provision for people to try the arts and heritage sector to see if they enjoy it, but in a way that is supportive of if they do have any kind of access requirements that we would need to make reasonable adjustments for. So we've only done, I think we've done 3 so far since last year. And really it's been kind of, at the moment, the main focus is a stepping stone to become a permanent volunteer. So the main reason we're doing it at the moment is it's a 6-week placement where they'll come for the same day each week and work with a curator in that department on a specific task. And at the same time, we do also find out what their interests are. If there's other areas, other departments they want to go and find out more about, if there's specific tours or exhibitions they want to go on, we'll also set that for them as well. But really the next stage we've got to at the moment is then going from being a behind the scenes volunteer with a curator to seeing actually if they want to then go into more of a front of house role. So for 2 of the volunteers, they've gone from being with the curator behind the scenes and now they're doing the hands-on desk. But obviously not at the moment because of lockdown, but they were going through the training and working to be able to come and do a regular hands-on desk with the public. And so for us, the long-term goal will be trying to help people get into the arts and heritage sector and at the same time raising awareness. So making environments that are suitable for people to work in with various access requirements, raising the awareness within departments and sort of supporting people. 2 of the volunteers were at university doing something that related to their volunteer placement, so how we can use their volunteer placement within the museum to support them in their studies. So yeah, it's about sort of getting people and making the journey into the arts and heritage sector more inclusive and accessible, but I think we've got a bit of a way to go at the moment.
I mean, this is creating inclusion thanks to the British Museum that they have such opportunities in their lives. Also, we have one question in the chat mode. April is asking, hello from the Philippines.
Hi.
April is also one of the ITP fellows from 2019.
Oh, wow, great.
Thank you for your presentation. I may have missed this detail. How long has this program been implemented at the British Museum? How long did you prepare for this program? In your FGDs, did you also invite autism group specialists apart from children and parents? Thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of how long has the program been running? So it's been in the museum since 2014. But this current sort of focus around visitors with learning disabilities and autistic visitors has been since 2017, so over the last 3 years. The specific early morning events were brought in last September, so September 2019, and we started the work, so the initial kind of surveys and advisory panels back in April last year. So about 6 months of gathering feedback and planning before we were then able to actually run the event in the museum. But like I said, that was part of wider work that had been done since 2017 before that. And then in terms of the advisory panel we used, because the advisory panel for that specific project was looking at the early morning events and families, it was predominantly families that we'd spoken to, we'd gone out through, going through like the national autistic groups, society groups and things like that. So it was through them, and it was individual representatives from some of the branches that came along who were also parents, and then bringing their children, and some just external parents and children that had come across the work we were doing. When we turn to focus more on the adults and young people, that's when we'll go to those groups and those different age ranges. So it's not that we're only focusing on families, it was just for this specific event and this specific part of the project where we worked with children and parents. But it is, like I said, part of a much wider piece of work. And it was just that we obviously can't do everything at the same time. So the first part we looked at was families, and now we're looking at doing a similar process with adults and young people and bringing different groups in to come and work with us as part of that.
Yeah, thank you for the detailed answer, Holly. I think we ran out of questions. If you don't have any other questions to ask, I think we have to finish our session for today. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Holly, for your contribution to this project. It was really an honor to have you here. And I hope that your knowledge and your experience will inspire other museum staff to implement something very similar here in Uzbekistan.
Good, thank you for having us. And if you do have any questions, I'm happy for people to send them over. So if once people watch the presentation, once it's been translated, or when they go away, if they've got any questions, then please, feel free to share our contact details, and I'm happy to answer questions via email.
Thank you one more time. See you the next time.
Okay. Yep. See you soon. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.